Okay. All right. So basically, I'd like to say a big welcome to everybody that's here today. We're going to be partnering with Strategyn in order to bring this webinar event to our members and to the participants in the co-action project. So we're really excited for Tony to have been able to take his time to share his knowledge and his expertise around innovation. He is an innovation expert and a jobs to be done guru, and we're very fortunate to have him with us on this call. I wanted to thank also everybody that's in attendance here, who's attending live, as well as those who will watch the recording afterwards. So now I'm going to pass it over to Tony, just so that he can move forward with his presentation on why innovation fails and how you can fix it.
Thanks, Sheree. I certainly appreciate that. So thanks for inviting me to the event. I appreciate the invite. It's a great opportunity. And let me just jump right in. So as Sheree says, we're going to talk about why innovation fails and how to fix it. And at a real high level, there is a simple key to success in innovation, something that will make it consistent and predictable. And what that is a great innovation process. It's just like any other business process. And if you want to be great at lead generation, you need a great lead generation process. If you want to be great at hiring people, you need a great hiring process. Think of innovation the same way. It's a business process that unfortunately is broken in many cases. So what we want to focus on today is first, why does innovation fail? Well, let me first define innovation. The way we think about innovation, it's this front end of before the development process. It's known as the product strategy process or customer development process, product planning, the front end of innovation. It's everything before product development. And the ultimate goal of this process is to develop or conceptualize, I should say, is to conceptualize a solution that you know with certainty is going to win in the marketplace before you even start developing it. So let me say that again. The goal here is to conceptualize a product that you know with certainty is going to win in the market before you even start developing it. That would be the ideal output of the innovation process. That way, you're not iterating on the concept once you start developing it. Now, as you may be aware, most innovation efforts never really attempt to even achieve this goal. And this takes us down the path of how innovation is often executed, more or less as an ideas first approach to innovation, where products are approved for development with more or less a limited understanding of the customer's needs. Now, this approach is inherently flawed because it makes success dependent on trial and error, and it makes it iterative, and it quite literally intertwines the development process with the innovation process, making both of them very inefficient because you're iterating on what the concept's supposed to do while you're building the concept. So you're iterating on the design, you're iterating on what it's supposed to do all at the same time, and this is what makes it so troublesome. So of course, a better approach would be a needs first approach, which really applies marketing 101 logic, where the whole goal is to discover all the customer's needs, figure out which are unmet, determine if there's segments of people with different unmet needs, and then target those segments that you want to go after, address the unmet needs. Now, of course, this sounds very logical, and this sounds like it should be simple, but it isn't. And that's the first part of the story I want to talk about, why innovation fails. I'd like to use this quote as a starting point here. You may have heard it before. Henry Ford says, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. Now, I've always found it interesting how people interpret this statement. They walk away thinking, well, customers apparently don't know what they want, or customers can't articulate their needs, or customers must have latent needs that they don't even know they have. Now, Steve Jobs came along years later and said, people don't know what they want until you show it to them. And again, this reinforced in many people's minds that, oh, I get it. Customers don't know what they want. They can't articulate their needs. They have latent needs. Now, what I'd like you to think through in your instance, do you believe customers have latent needs? Again, these are needs that they don't even know they have. Now, we've asked this polling question in many audiences over the years, and the answer is pretty consistent, where about 90% of the participants believe that customers have latent needs. And this is inherently problematic because if you believe customers don't know what they want and can't articulate their needs, why would you ever take a needs first approach to innovation? You would just take an ideas first approach and guess at it and make it iterative and so on. So the interesting thing here is Henry Ford and Steve Jobs aren't saying customers don't know their needs. What they're really saying is if I had asked people what solutions they wanted, they would have said faster horses. Or people don't know what solutions they want until you show it to them. Now, this is true, right? Customers don't know what solutions they want. Customers can't articulate the best solutions. Customers have latent solutions they can't conceptualize. Now, this doesn't mean, of course, they don't know their needs, but it means they don't know what solutions are best. But why should they, right? They're not the innovators. It's your job as innovators to come up with solutions that will address the customer's unmet needs. But a solution is not a need. Clearly, a solution satisfies a need. So that takes us down this path, of asking people what solutions they want, we know is a failed approach to innovation because they don't know what they want. So instead, let's ask customers about their needs. This brings up the next question. What exactly is a customer need? Well, despite all the talk about customer needs and the amount of time spent discovering them and all the money spent on trying to understand them, there's really a dirty little secret about innovation, and that is there isn't agreement as to what a customer need even is. So you've all been in meetings with marketing and sales and development and R&D, and everyone talks about needs in a different way. The sales teams are talking about what the customer's wants are and the features, and the marketing team is talking about the exciters and the delighters, and development's talking about requirements and specifications. Now, everybody in your organization wants to satisfy customers' needs, but they can't agree on what a need is, which makes it extraordinarily hard to agree on what the needs are and which are unmet. Again, we've asked the survey question many times over the years. Is there agreement on your product team as to what a customer need is? And I'd like you to just think through that for a moment and answer that question. Is there agreement on your product team as to what a customer need is? Again, the results that we typically get here say that 95% of product teams do not agree on what a customer need is, which really points out why innovation fails. The goal of innovation is to come up with solutions that address unmet needs. And if we can't agree on what a need is, we can't agree on what the needs are, which are unmet, and how to best solve them. So the problem with innovation isn't that customers don't know their needs. The problem is that companies can't agree on what a need is. So the implications, there are many, of course, but foremost, customer needs and their priority are unknown. What this does is it forces the innovation process to become guesswork as people are forced back into the ideas first approach to innovation. And as a result, companies become vulnerable to failure and to disruption. So these are all things we want to avoid. So this takes us to where we've spent much of our time over the last 30 years is to figure out how should a need be defined. Now, when you step back at this, you realize that a need is a statement in words that have to express something of value to your organization. And it's got to come from the customer. So the way I like thinking about this is that a set of needs should instruct the organization on how to successfully create customer value. We started building out a set of characteristics for the perfect need statement. And they look like this. First off, they have to be useful across all the key business disciplines: sales, marketing, development, R&D. There has to be agreement that these are the needs. There can't be a sales understanding of needs and a marketing's understanding and so on. They also have to be knowable and discoverable. We can't keep living with this concept that customers have latent needs and they don't know what they want. They can't articulate their needs. We have to define needs in a way that they are knowable to the customers and discoverable by organizations. They have to be solution independent. We're not talking about solutions. A solution is not a need. Here's what I learned over the years too. They have to be stable over time. And this is probably the most difficult one to conceptualize, because a lot of people believe customer needs change quickly over time. Yet it's going to be extremely hard to be effective at innovation if that's true. So we're going to have to define needs in such a way that makes them stable over time. They have to be measurable, controllable in the design of the product, predictive of success. They must be unambiguous. So as people read them, whether you're in sales, marketing, development, R&D, or whether you're a customer, everyone agrees that that's and understands what the statement means. They have to be valid across multiple geographies. If you're capturing needs in Australia or New Zealand or Singapore or the US, they have to be the same sets of needs. We can't have different needs for different geographies. And they have to be the metrics that customers are going to use to judge the value of your product. Once you present that product to them, they're going to say, oh, this is a great product, or this product isn't so great. And they're going to use some criteria to decide whether it's great or not. So with all that said, how do you uncover a set of needs that meets all these different criteria? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to change the unit of analysis. So you probably heard this quote over here on the right. People don't want a quarter-inch drill, they want a quarter-inch hole. So this gives us an opportunity. So what we're saying is, instead of focusing on the product, let's focus on what the customer is trying to accomplish. And the way we say this is, let's focus on the customer's job to be done. And this is really the basic element of jobs to be done theory. It puts a little different lens on innovation. The theory is fundamental is people buy products and services to get a job done. So let's study the job they're trying to get done, make the job the unit of analysis. Now, the very first implication that this has is it changes the way we're going to define a market. We're not going to define a market as a product like the drill market. We're going to define the market around the job to be done, the creating the quarter-inch hole market. By defining it that way, you can start breaking down that job into a process and understand how people measure success along each step of the way. And this is really going to put a different lens on innovation. As the late Clay Christensen said, innovation becomes much more predictable and far more profitable when it begins with a deep understanding of the job the customer is trying to get done. In an event in Boston a number of years back, he said innovation can be 100% predictable if indeed we can understand all the variables that contribute to failure. Well, our success rate isn't quite 100%, but it's about 86%, making it 5 times the industry average. So we've talked about why the innovation process fails. Let's talk about how we can fix it by using a jobs to be done lens. The first question we ask now is, how can you obtain a deep understanding of the customer's job to be done? What's going to be different here than typical market research? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to study the job to be done at a very granular level. As you can see here, we have the job the customer is trying to execute, these different steps that they go through to try to get that job completed, and all the outcomes. Those outcomes are the metrics people use to measure success when getting the job done. So they are the customer's needs. That's where we're going to focus. The way we get to them is we start by creating the job map to lay out all those job steps. It's a step-by-step description of what the customer is trying to accomplish. So it's not a process map. It's not a customer journey map. It's not describing what the customer is doing. It's describing what they're trying to do, what they're trying to accomplish step by step. We have an article in the Harvard Business Review that we can certainly make available to you, the Customer-Centered Innovation Map from 2008, that goes into this in more detail. But suffice it to say that there's commonality in the kinds of steps that people go through when they're executing a job. There's usually a planning step up front. Then they have to go gather the inputs, organize them, prepare them so the job could be executed. There's typically a confirmation step to make sure once you start executing the job, you get the right output. Then you begin the execution, you monitor the output, make modifications if need be, and conclude. Now, I'm going to show an example here that gets into not just the job steps, but also shows the customer's desired outcomes. Again, an outcome is a customer-defined metric that instructs innovators how to help customers get a job done faster, more predictably, and achieving the desired result. So the example I want to show here is the job executed being surgeons, the job to be done being remove an anatomical structure surgically. And those steps that you see numbered there, those are the steps in the job map: establishing initial access, gaining visual access to the target structure, terminating the blood supply to the target structure, and so on. Removing the target structure, repairing or reconstruct the remnant structure. And underneath each of those, you see a set of statements, like number 25, for example. Minimize the time it takes to isolate the blood vessels feeding the target structure. That's the first thing that surgeons are trying to do as they begin that step of terminating the blood supply to the structure. And as they're doing that, they're trying to minimize the likelihood that bleeding occurs when terminating the blood supply. Next, they want to minimize the time it takes to transect all the blood vessels feeding the structure. They want to minimize the time it takes to stop the bleeding that results from transecting blood vessels, and so on. And you can read through this. It's quite literally a set of instructions as to what they're trying to accomplish as they go about and get that job done. And they're laid out in order, a chronological order of how they should be executed in order to get the job done perfectly. So note here also that we're showing about 65 different outcomes. Typically there's between 100 and 150. We're just showing a short version of this job in this set of outcomes, just to give you an idea of the granularity and the level of granularity that's needed in order to be effective at innovation. So with that, we now have a set of customer needs. And notice that these are structured in a very specific way. Again, over 30 years, we've tested many variations of this statement, and they have to go through a lot. They have a long life cycle. They are first gathered from customers, so customers have to be able to state them. Customers have to be able to validate them. Customers have to be able to prioritize them. The information then comes into the organization. Sales and marketing and development have to be able to use them to define a product concept. They have to be useful for creating a value proposition. They have to be useful for guiding ideation. So the structure of these statements is very important, and it doesn't change throughout the entire process, because what we're trying to do here is connect what the customer wants to what the company is trying to deliver. So again, notice the structure: a direction of improvement, a metric that can be measured and controlled in the design of the product, the object of control, what the customer is trying to accomplish, and in what context. And there's two general formats that we use: minimize the time it takes to do something, and minimize the likelihood of bad things happening, damaging blood vessels along the pathway to the structure. And what we're trying to do is to get the job done faster, more predictably, higher output throughput, so they can get the desired result. And all these statements will lead us down the path of understanding the customer's job perfectly. What you can expect is about 100 or more outcome statements that instruct the innovator how to help customers get the job done as well as they possibly can. The first time we applied this outside of my job at IBM, where I spent years trying to think through this, we worked with Quartus Corporation. This was back in the early 1990s, where we studied the job of restoring blood flow to an artery. And we helped Quartus and interventional cardiologists create products that could address a dozen or more outcomes that were underserved. Again, we define needs as the metrics they use to measure success when getting the job done. Once they knew exactly which needs were most underserved, they created a portfolio of products that addressed them, and their market share went from roughly 1% to over 20%. And we also discovered a really interesting unmet need, which was to minimize the likelihood of restenosis, and that's the recurrence of the blockage. They said, well, we have a product in development that might be able to do exactly that. It's called a stent. So they tripled down on their resources. They were the first to market with that product. That became a billion-dollar business in just 2 years. And Quartus eventually got acquired by J&J. It's just a great all-around story. So how can you discover which needs are unmet? That's what we want to get into next. We've talked about how we can discover the needs, but we want to figure out which needs are unmet so we can address them very effectively. So let's go back to the theory for a second. We know that people buy products that help them get a job done better and more cheaply. So we want to know, in order to get the job done better, we have to identify and address outcomes that we say are underserved. So these are important outcomes that are that are not well satisfied. And then we want to look at the outcomes that are overserved as well. These are unimportant outcomes that are well satisfied. These become areas for cost reduction, whereas the underserved outcomes become targets for value creation. Because again, think about this. What we're trying to do is to innovate so that we can get the job done better and more cheaply. So we want to understand both sides of the equation so we can innovate on the value add side and we can innovate on the cost reduction side. The way we do this is to ask customers. Customers will tell us which needs are unmet. We generally field a survey that goes out to anywhere from 90 to 100 customers, not just your customers, but people buying yours and competitive products. And we ask them how important it is when they execute the job step, how important each outcome is, and the degree of satisfaction given the product that they're using today. Now with that, we end up with sets of inputs. You can see all these dots here represent one need a piece. So behind each dot is one need. And pretty quickly, you can see here that the needs over on the far right are underserved. These are important but poorly satisfied needs. Again, these become opportunities to get the job done better. On the left side, we have unimportant but oversatisfied needs, and they represent the opportunities to get the job done more cheaply. The interesting thing here is all the customer's needs are known before ideation even begins, right? Because what we're trying to do here is we're trying to satisfy many of the customer's unmet needs, not just one or two. Think of it like this. I always like this visual. I created this years ago, but it works in my head as to what we're visually trying to accomplish. We have all these outcomes that are satisfied to a certain level of satisfaction with our current product. And what we're trying to do is to figure out which outcomes are the least satisfied and most important, and then push them forward in the next iteration of the product so that we're better satisfying the most unmet needs. This, of course, will then force other needs to be the most unmet needs. So the next iteration will focus on them. And this goes on for years until you can work your way to getting the job done perfectly. So these opportunities move, but these outcomes remain stable over time. And your goal as an innovator is not just to focus on one unmet need, it's to focus on many unmet needs. The reason I say that is people won't switch if your product, your new product gets the job done just a little bit better. You can ask yourself this, would you switch from a favorite brand of anything for the promise of getting the job done 1% better or 2% better? Probably not. But what we have found in our work is that if you can get the job done about 15% better or more, now you have a chance of winning in the marketplace. So that should be the goal, is to pick, even if there's 10 unmet needs, satisfy all 10 unmet needs. If there's 40, do 10 at a time through multiple product iterations over the next few years, and you'll jump ahead and stay ahead of the competition. Think about it like this as well. Once we have those needs, you can systematically generate, evaluate, and evolve the ideas. They're an input into the ideation process. So you can quite literally take those statements, like minimize the time it takes to move an adjacent structure out of the visual field. You know the current level of satisfaction, and you start brainstorming solutions, different alternative solutions that could minimize the time it takes to move an adjacent structure. And you evaluate them for the ability to satisfy the outcome along with cost, effort, and risk. And you work to create the best concept. And then you repeat that for all the other outcomes as well until you've created a new feature set for your product. And again, but you'll know that by adding these features to your product, that your product will win in the marketplace. And how do you know that? It's because you know in advance that these are the most unmet needs, and you know that your solution addresses the customer's most unmet needs. So the benefits of outcome-based research are numerous. A few here. Well, first, it breaks down silos. So the siloed views are replaced with a shared understanding of the customer's unmet needs. And that in and of itself is huge. If your organization can go from a position where they don't agree on what a need is to they agree on what all the customer's unmet needs are, that's huge, because now everyone is at least focusing in the right areas to go create value. This, of course, would replace guesswork, opinion, and gut feel with customer outcome data, which aligns the organization. Everything's customer driven. And therefore, failed and incremental innovations are replaced with breakthrough innovations. And the reason I say that again is because you're not just trying to satisfy one unmet need, you know all the unmet needs instead of just a handful, and you know them all up front. This is very helpful when we helped Microsoft turn around their software assurance business. They were really struggling getting people to subscribe or resubscribe. They were losing subscribers at an alarming rate, and they had really just one more chance to get this right. So they did exactly as described here. They understood the jobs the customers were trying to get done, the outcomes that they were using to measure success. We found many unmet needs. They worked feverishly to address over 20 unmet needs, reinvented their program, and turned it around immediately. The next year, they doubled the year-to-year revenue. Another question I'd like to discuss here is what happens when people don't agree on which needs are unmet? Because nearly any market that you'll work in most of the markets we've worked in, people don't agree on which needs are unmet. And this goes back to basic marketing 101, right? People, there are segments of people with different unmet needs. So to effectively discover people with different set of unmet needs, we don't want to segment around demographics or psychographics or attitudes or behaviors. The way to do this effectively is to actually segment around the customer's unmet needs. Now, most companies can't do this because they don't agree on what a need is or what the needs are or which are unmet, and it makes it very ineffective. I know people have attempted needs-based segmentation for years, but without some science behind it, it's not very effective. But we've made it very effective by being very consistent with the input into the equation, which is these outcome statements. So segmentation works like this. Envision that we have a sample of 600 people out there that we gave the same survey to, and a third of the sample, 200 of those people, tell us that outcomes 10, 20, and 30 are really important and unsatisfied. And then another third of the sample says they think outcomes 40, 50, and 60 are really important and unsatisfied. Another third of the sample says, no, we don't agree with any of that. We think outcomes 70, 80, and 90 are very overserved. So what we're doing here is we're putting people into segments based on how they rate the importance and satisfaction of those outcome statements. And we can then quite literally profile the segments after they're created to see what's causing them to have differences in unmet needs. The benefits of doing this are, again, numerous. Phantom segments, which are generally based around demographics or psychographics or attitudes, are replaced with hidden segments of opportunity that exist in reality. And the reason I say it like that, they're hidden from businesses generally because they're not segmenting around unmet needs. They're segmenting around demographics and other classification schemes. And there are segments that exist in reality. In other words, there are segments out there of people with different unmet needs. We just have to discover them. And that's what this allows us to do. So we're replacing misleading demographic-based personas with valuable needs-based personas. And vague targets are replaced with precise targets for value creation. We know exactly what the segments are and what are the unmet needs in each segment and the degree to which they're underserved or overserved. This was particularly important when we helped Bosch into the North American circus market. They came to us and said, we want a new product to wear the Bosch label. We want to target the high end of the market, and we want this to be our premium brand. So in order for that to even work, there had to be a segment of customers that had some unmet needs. So we could solve those problems and create this high-end differentiated product. So using the segmentation techniques that we just talked about here, we did discover a segment of tradesmen that had 14 unmet needs that nobody else had. And the reason they did is they had to make more lengthy cuts and angle cuts. They had to make more blade height adjustments and angle adjustments. There were more finished carpenters. And as a result, they were making more complex cuts. They had 14 unmet needs nobody else had. That became their target. They addressed all 14 unmet needs, and they created the CS20 circular saw, which was the most popular circular saw in North America for about 10 years or so. So the question I love to ask here is, what are the chances of success at innovation if a product team, the Bosch team, your team, any team, doesn't know what segments exist and what the unmet needs are? And of course, the answer is very low, right? Let's say it's 17%, but I think that's generous. What we're trying to do is flip this around and say, well, what are the chances of success if a product team does know what segments exist and what unmet needs exist? Just like that Bosch team. Do you know how long it took them to come up with the CS20 circuit saw concept once they realized that segment existed and those are the 14 unmet needs? It took them just 3 hours. And as they said, well, it's not as if we hadn't thought about this before, but the problem is we've had thousands of ideas. We just didn't know which ones really would be of value to the customer. And I think that's pretty common amongst most of our clients and many companies. We rarely go into a company that says, we don't have any ideas. It's usually the opposite. They say, we have so many ideas, we just don't know which ones to pursue. This gives you a way to prioritize those. And if you have that information going into your ideation activity, you can increase your success rate up to 86%. So that's how it's done. How do you fix innovation? All this is built into what we call the outcome-driven innovation process. And the reason I think it's valuable is because it's aligning the actions of the entire organization around a shared understanding of customer needs. And once you do that, you can accelerate the creation of customer value because you're all on the same page. So the way the process works, once again, you define your market, but not as a product or a technology. You define it as a group of people trying to get a job done. Then you define your customers' needs, all of them. And the way we define them is to, first off, what we call them is not specifications or requirements or exciters or delighters. They're the metrics that people use to measure success when getting a job done. And you work with customers to understand that set of needs before they're prioritized. Then we go on to figure out, well, what are the opportunities? Which needs are unmet? In other words, overserved or underserved. This is done quantitatively, so you can look across the population and feel very confident that you know exactly where to focus to get the job done better and where to cost reduce. Then, of course, there's the segmentation component, where we look for segments of customers with different unmet needs. Again, this is done by segmenting around the unmet needs themselves, not through demographics, psychographics, attitudes, or behaviors. Now, notice what we've done in these first 4 steps. This is marketing 101. We define the market, we define the customer's needs, we figured out which ones are underserved and overserved, and if there's segments of people with different unmet needs. With all those inputs understood at a very granular level, then you're able to formulate a winning growth strategy. And that's the ultimate goal. So with all these inputs, we can inform generally how to better position existing products, how a sales team should talk to customers in different segments to tell them the best story or one that connects with them the most, how to improve your existing offerings. Are there gaps in the portfolio that you need to fill, like Quartus did with the stent? Are people willing to pay more to get the job done perfectly, and how much more? It informs every aspect of the organization, and the reason it does is because the entire organization is dependent on a solid understanding of customer needs. So it brings efficiency along many, many fronts. Now, companies use this process not only externally facing to understand their external customers' needs to create products, but they use it internally as well, so they can improve their business processes with innovation efforts as well. We have a number of stories that I'll finish up with here. Arm & Hammer, for example, they grew their year-to-year revenue by over 30%, simply by repositioning the way they talked about their products. So same products, same pricing, It was the way they talked about them. They were focused on the nutritionist as a customer, and they realized that that really was not the job executor. The real job executor was the dairy herdsman, and the real job was to optimize dairy herd productivity. And when they understood all the outcomes that their product could help address in that job, it made a much better story and it increased their revenue pretty dramatically. Kroll OnTrack, very other different story. They entered the electronic evidence discovery business, and they after 2 failures, they got it right, and we helped them do that. What they had wrong was they thought that their technology, because it was IT related, was really focused at the IT department, and IT was their customer. And by extracting data off hard drives, that was really the job to get done in this electronic discovery space. But what they learned is that the real job executor were the legal teams, and the job to be done was to find information that would support or refute a case. And once they understood that, they not only took data off the hard drive, but they made it searchable so that the legal team could quickly find data that was meaningful to them. And that catapulted them into the leadership position where they stayed for about 15 years. Here's an example of a company using ODI at scale. And what I mean by that is they not only applied it to all their external products, but to many internal processes as well. And Clive Meanwell, who you can see here writing in this last paragraph, says that it drove their technology selection, their development priorities, the manufacturing strategies, and commercial planning. And the beauty of this is that they were acquired by Novartis last year at a 41% premium. And he equated a lot of that value to the innovation efforts that they had going on across their company in all these different areas using this approach. So that's the ultimate. So to close out here, innovation does not have to be a game of chance. What we've showed here today, innovation is a process, needs are knowable, unmet needs can be identified, opportunities can be prioritized, creativities can be focused, and most important, winning products can be conceptualized with certainty before a product enters the development process. Now, if you want to read a little bit more about this, there's a free ebook and audiobook at jobsbedonebook.com, and you can see the hyphens in between the words there as well. You can also contact us at ulwick@strategyn.com or info@strategyn.com. And with that, Sheree, I'll hand it over back to you.
So thank you so much for that. I must say a big thank you. We're going to put this link for the Jobs to be Done book. It's actually been highly influential for me and I've learned a lot. And I must be honest, I've actually seen this presentation or something very similar a couple of times. But today, for some reason, I've taken a lot more out of it. And yeah, it's really expanded an understanding. So I'm very happy with with the outcomes from today, that's for sure. I do have a couple of questions that had actually been submitted earlier, if we could go through those. And then I do have some that I've actually just got myself now out of this particular one. So one of the questions that we had earlier, this was a discussion from our team, is when we know the distinction between a job map and a process map. But do you find it useful when you're building out that first step to use a process map in a job setting in order to form the basis of the actual job map to come up with the framing of the customer needs statement?
Yeah, we don't recommend that. And the reason is a process map has will get you thinking in solution space. And you start thinking about what are they doing as opposed to what they're trying to do. And in all our research, we try to eliminate any solution-based thinking because we don't want it to interfere with what we're trying to accomplish. So what we find is that customers find that very comfortable as well, because all we're asking them is, what are you trying to accomplish? What are you trying to accomplish as the first step? And then what are you trying to accomplish? And then what? And we just keep them on that path. So they keep thinking about what are they trying to do? And once they get in that mindset, they're on a roll, and they'll deliver a good amount of information in a very short period of time, and you can start putting together a good job map in an hour or two in many cases.
Wow, okay. Do you find that people sort of push through this process either through not not being aware of what it is or just how valuable it can be, or because they've got that solution focus that they're trying to sort of bring to market?
I think it's both. People love the ideas first approach. It's fun. It truly is. We're uniquely problem solvers as humans, right? And it's fun to understand the problem a little bit and then start jumping in and thinking about solutions. But I think the other aspect is people believe innovation is not a disciplined process and can't be, right? And I think it goes back to some of the things I talked about, where they think that needs are unknowable and customers can't articulate them and they have latent needs, which feeds this thinking, right? Which says, well, if they don't know the needs, let's just come up with solutions. Let's do ideas first. So I think those are the underlying root causes, if you will, of why the needs first approach is just so slow to get adopted.
So just on that then, do you think that it's more of a marketing approach, I guess, first, where they're not understanding the distinction between, I guess, a customer avatar from a marketing perspective, where the focus is on, like you mentioned before, the demographics and the psychographics, versus actually on the understanding truly at a deep level the customer need and what's actually needing to be done?
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. They're different disciplines, right? The marketing discipline of the last several decades is really focused on reaching customers with a message, and the way they're generally reached is through an understanding of where they live and what their zip codes are and what they eat and what magazines they read and those kind of things, so we can find them and message to them. But so much of that has changed. Um, a lot of that's not necessary anymore, because if you get your message out there around the job that your product gets done, and you just put it out there broadly, people are out there searching how to solve problems. They're not searching for products because they don't know the product, right? But they know they have a problem. And if you can own the search space and AdWords and your advertising to focus around the problem and how you solve it, that's what really pulls people into your solution and generates the sales that you need.
Okay. So this is obviously a very data-driven process. So how do you go, I guess, about identifying the right data set of the outcomes in which you run the survey? Is that from the customer interview?
Yes. So all those need statements that you saw come from customer interviews. And in this example here today, I showed the surgical example of repairing or removing a structure surgically. So just to give you some backdrop on that, a few members of our team got together with a handful of surgeons for about 4 hours. And we sat around a table and went through step by step and asked them, what are they trying to do next at the job step level, and then outcome by outcome. And after about 4 hours, we had 75, 80 outcome statements. And then we did the same thing again the next day with a different group of surgeons. And after that set of interviews, we had well over 100 outcomes, and we felt we had completed it. We then put that set of outcomes in front of several other surgeons just for review and validation before they went into a survey. And once we felt comfortable that we had a complete set of needs and they were unambiguous and well stated and met all the rules, then we put them in the survey to have them prioritized.
Do you have any, I mean, obviously, when you get that many needs that are identified, do you find that it's difficult to get survey respondents to come back with information that's complete?
Well, it's harder, but it's not impossible. We've been doing it for a good 30 years. Um, it requires a little different take on the way you construct your questionnaire and design it. We've practiced on many different ways to do this. And there is a best practice approach where we take just all the outcomes of each job step and put them on a screen, because they're all online surveys. We just show maybe 8 or 10 outcomes at a time. And we ask people to rate the importance and satisfaction right next to each other in order so they can quickly read them. We highlight the object of control in each statement so they can focus on the most critical aspect, and we can get them through each section very quickly. So they're answering each outcome in about 30 seconds or less. So it doesn't really take them all that long to prioritize 100 plus outcomes. Having said that, the fallout rate is certainly higher than the 5 or 10-minute survey, because these surveys are 20 to 30 minutes in some cases.
Mhm.
We also pay people to take them, so sometimes that helps. But all in all, we run into so many other issues too, of course, like everyone does. You have people who we call them the cheaters and speeders, where they're just running through it, that they're filling out the 20-minute survey in 3 minutes. We don't allow that. So we have all these mechanisms in place to make sure that we get a good quality data set. So to answer your question, it's definitely doable. It's a little bit of work, but it's worth the effort, because now you have a data set that you can trust to build your product strategy around.
Okay. No, yeah, it's really the whole thing. The process has been very interesting. When you get to the underserved market, how do you actually prioritize then which need should be solved first if it's in an underserved area, or do you normally, like with the, I guess, was it Ryobi, the Bosch one that you used before, you'd said that they already had a solution for it, but having that need statement there that was identified in an underserved market, obviously that became something then that they first focused on. Is that how you would prioritize it if it's in an underserved area, that and then there's already an existing potential solution there, that's the first one because it's, I guess, more simple?
Yeah, it's a great point. So you're exactly right. So uh, the way they thought about it, and the way a lot of companies think about it, is they say, well, let's do this in multiple product iterations, right? What can we do first? What can we do in the next 6 months, right, to improve our product? So they may look at 3 or 4 of those unmet needs and say, wow, we already have a feature pretty much designed, right? We can add that in very quickly. They may not be the top 4 outcomes, but they're all in the top 14, right? So that could be their first iteration. And then prioritize them uh, based on capability, uh, based on length of time. Some of these outcomes they may not be able to satisfy at all, and those go to R&D, and the R&D folks will work on them for years to figure out how to address them. But they become instructional and very informative to the R&D team, because now they know where to focus to create value in a product.
Okay. And I mean, obviously, all of the examples that you've given are driven towards more bigger companies. Do you think that this type of approach only can be used in big companies where there's a lot of resources behind in terms of a team, or can they or should they be used in small business?
Well, they certainly can. We work with a lot of small businesses, even startups, and we hear from a lot of startups too that just want some basic help in getting started. And the question we often hear is, what's the minimalist approach we can take here and still derive a lot of value from it? And the answer is always the same. If a company can understand who the job executor is and what the job is they're trying to get done, and then understand the job map, all the pieces, and if they're just playing in that field, they're at least in the right place, right? And software companies that want to like own a platform to get the entire job done now know what this platform has to do. So it can very effectively lay out, um, you know, the customer insights needed to define your product, define a product platform, or find holes in the product that you currently have, to say, hey, look, we're getting this part of the job done, but not these other 3 steps. We could go focus there. That kind of work can be done in a day or 2 days. That's not time consuming. All they need is a handful of customers in front of them for 2, 3 hours to figure out, those key elements of the process.
Great. Okay. I don't really have any more questions at the moment, and I just definitely want to say a big thank you for your time. It's been excellent.
Sheree, thanks so much. Thanks for the invite. I appreciate it. And I was kind of curious, you said you had seen presentations like this a couple of times. Um, what triggered some new insights?
It actually, the notes that I'd written down out of this one was certainly about the job map. I was wondering how the job map could be developed. I mean, I was aware of the customer needs statement and the framing of that, but then seeing it written like that for some reason today, I just took a bit more away, thinking, I wonder how that could be more driven to understanding, like not, I guess more getting extracting from the customer the actual need, not giving them a framework, but sometimes I think in guiding the interview, you actually get a more productive outcome. And I just wondered whether that would be in any way linked. And I understand completely what you're saying in the response with you try to stay away from the solutions-based outcome, and then whether the interviewing technique could actually be used in a process map type of way to actually extract what it is that they're trying to do. So I think you've kind of answered that, but that was certainly a big one. And I guess the other thing was just how data driven the actual approach is. I don't know why I'd not made that sort of connection before. And the fact that people rush through this type of process, possibly because they're not aware of necessarily just how important, and that has certainly been our experience actually in the recruitment phase for this particular project, was the rush to get the solution to the market actually has caused a lot of people to completely overlook just how important the really deep understanding of the customer need and then the subsequent ideation that should come from that, and in order to actually be able to articulate it to bring it to market. So I think maybe it was the framing in our recruitment phrase for this particular project has made us much more aware ourselves of just how unaware people actually are about how structured innovation can be, if you take the time to really understand at a deeper level the customer need itself.
Yeah, very well said.
Thanks. But yeah, no, it's been really good. I always learn something new. So
Me too.
That's been wonderful. Thank you so much for your time today.
It's my pleasure. You take care. Thank you.
Will, thank you.
Yeah, bye now.
Bye.